This is my M1123 Humvee on air suspension. It's controlled wirelessly with an Xbox controller and talks to an ESP32 little computer board. The whole thing is homemade, used a lot of LLM, ChatGPT, Claude code to program it all and design it. So it's somewhat complex. I'll do another video later talking just about the control system because that was its own project, kind of major sidebar to make it all work. But it is working, and it's working pretty well. It now can do major load carrying by adding a lot of pressure to the air springs, or be very comfortable when the car is unloaded. The whole system tucks up under the fender, and since the big tires aren't able to tuck in the fender, that's all free space. So I mounted the entire thing on horse stall mat to try and dampen some of the vibration. It's got two compressors which all run air line. It's 1/4 inch air line, runs back to the back where I'll add an air dryer, and they splice together with check valves and then feed the air tank. Whole thing is in a 3D printed box that I made myself with a breaker, and it's clear on the lid, which is nice for troubleshooting.
So you might be asking, how did we end up at air suspension as the solution for the Humvee? That's a good question because this was not easy and it wasn't as straightforward as I hoped it would be. Everything was custom made, much like a Ferrari. The fundamental problem with the Humvee suspension with the 1123 and the heavy variants is that it's an overall pretty lightweight truck. It's an aluminum body, a composite hood on a somewhat heavy steel frame. And so the suspension, the frame, those things are big and heavy, but it's designed to have an ambulance body or a missile launcher on the back. And if it doesn't have those things, then the springs in the back are way too big. And it basically rides like it has a welded steel rear axle. It doesn't compress at all, and it's terrible. So about a year and a half ago, I switched to Armada springs, but doing all the Humvee stuff with my now neutered Humvee, I was bottoming it out pretty much every time, having to unload and take 2 trips, which was not what I wanted to do with the design of this car. I ended up kind of doing this twice, and the original plan was to try to find a shock that I could build a coilover out of and maybe use a Land Rover LR4 bag or a Lincoln Navigator bag or something off conventional cars that have abundant parts that are cheap. But turns out none of those coilover style bags were going to work, and ended up using a Universal Air bladder, the 7XL, which is a new bag for them, but has been working very well so far and had a lot more volume. Basically what I've got to do is fix this to the front of here outside the radius of the bag. This is the part that is going to basically represent the bag. It's about this size. I've got them sitting over here from Universal Air, the 7XLs I think they are. So there's a couple ways to do this, and at first I was thinking I would just grind a bolt so that I could then get that parallel to the upper pin, weld that on, and strengthen it, and then the shock would slide on, bolt on, and I'd cut the end off, and that would be that. Up here I'd extend this bolt and then weld a gusset in from the, the crown of the spring perch. The other thing I'm dealing with, which is kind of the final piece of this puzzle that I think is going to make this solution not work, is that I don't really have any bump stop security if, say, my airbag for some reason is to get cut or fail or something were to happen like that. So the problem is that the tires stick out past the hood, and so if there is no spring, then the suspension will come down until something compresses to a stopping point, and that's going to be control arms or probably not actually the control arms, but maybe the half shafts, or basically long story short is the tire is going to hit the hood, and the hood's not strong enough to support the weight of the car. It's going to destroy the hood, and that's going to be a big problem. So there is one thing I can do. I don't see a whole lot of ways that I can organize a bump stop unless I use the shock, and it's not strong enough that I want to use it. Like, I don't want to be hitting this in full compression of the suspension, like, going over sweet jumps or anything, but this would be far better than having nothing at all in the event that, say, the bag goes down and I need a place that's going to stop. So When this is fully compressed, it's 13 inches pin to pin. And essentially what I could do is I could take my part, and what I've done here is made a part that the shock will house into, and a bolt will thread and then stay flush here so that I can mount it in this position here, parallel. I don't have to support that and everything, but I can basically locate that where it needs to go, line it up in a way that it needs to be, and then if I can make the pin distance 13 inches from here with the suspension and the fully as low as I ever want to possibly go position, that's where that needs to go. So the challenge is that if I use the existing location, then that locates this part somewhere up about here, which then creates additional problems, conflicts with the bag itself, makes the problem set kind of more complex. Now, I'm not the first person to think of air suspension for a Humvee. In fact, Johnny Magic and some other crews from Wichita, Kansas, where I'm originally from, did this about 20 years ago.
It worked out just a small world kind of a thing that my friend Chris, who is an engineer by training, had actually talked to Johnny 10 years ago when Johnny was trying to get 80 or 100 miles per gallon out of modified Humvees. And crazy enough, Johnny actually answered the phone when I called him because we both had the same first 6 digits of our phone number that both turned out to be Verizon phones issued in Wichita maybe 20 years ago. And we still have them. So out of curiosity, he picked up and was super helpful in guiding me through some of the big directional decisions that needed made on this project.
And I was able to copy a lot of their design and kind of evolve off of what they had used to accommodate the types of airbags I wanted to use, and pretty much copied their upper spring perch setup with the rod coming straight through where the old bolt attached to the shock, and then made a similar just single point weld for the bottom control arm.
I think it'll be strong enough, and if not, I'll build it back better.
So fortunately found Universal Air, and they do have a bag that is hollowed out and basically fully sealed but with a hole in the center that you can pass a shock and do what amounts to a coilover. But they were super helpful on the phone, and in talking with them, the problem with doing that system is that you actually lose a lot of air volume, which then makes it a small volume bag even though it's pretty large, and then you have to run a higher pressure, which then impacts the basically the spring load. And all around, this is a much better deal. This is going to be a softer ride. It's the rolling bag style. I forget what that's called, but it's the rolling bag like they use on a semi truck. So that'll work pretty ideal. And then the challenge will just be putting that in place of the spring and making sure everything clears. And so that's going to be a complex problem in itself, but that's where we're going. So
A lot of this project was a case of planning it out really carefully and then discovering that I needed to scrap that plan and do something different as soon as I got one part in place, and it started being obvious what would and would not work and what would be simple and what would be very complex to execute. So here I'm just speccing the size of the bag, how much space it's going to take, and how much shim and spacer it might require to get everything to sit level.
all right, so we got the front suspension taken apart for the second side, and here's the order that I did everything. First I pulled this, it's a 14, 15, I think it was a 14 I used. So you take this cap off, which is just the head of the socket driver, the extension. Then that cap comes out. You take then this bolt out, 15, 14, whatever, I think it was 14. And then that frees up your CV shaft or half shaft or whatever you call it. I took the pin and castle nut off of this, broke it loose with this guy, just put a bunch of tension on it, use the nut to press against, and then hit it with a hammer, a couple of encouragement taps so that you can maybe do it with a little less pressure, and it'll come apart when it's ready. Let's see, next is the bolt here. That was a 24, I think. 24, and that guy comes out pretty straight away. If you use the jack to meet that somewhere, that'll unload the threads, make it a little easier, but it's not required. Take this guy off, little hose clamp, and then this, which is a 15 I want to say. Comes right off of here, and the hose will hang. That's just an air vent, so there's nothing in it. Then unscrew this nut down to almost the bottom to where it's co-altitude with the end of the bolt. Put your splitter on it, same deal, give it some tension, hit it with a hammer, and it'll pop loose. Unfortunately, since the nut's on there, it'll be held captive. It won't go far, it'll just be loud. And then you can use your jack to bring that up and take the tension off of it and take it apart. Then you go up here, 38 mil, and once you've got, I think the other side is a 32 here to hold it still. So if that's under tension, it'll hold itself mostly still, but otherwise when you get towards the end, you may have to hold the bolt yourself. You can take that pin out and the shock's just gonna rest on the pin. Nothing happens when you take the nut off. Underneath, take apart these two bolts. They're in there pretty good, and I think they're 24s as well. There's two of them, and once you have those loose, then the shock is loose but still hanging. Give a little bit of tension by lifting the control arm up a little bit, and then you can push this pin out by hand. That'll come out, and then you can drop the shock out of the bottom, and then you just have your spring in there. As you take the tension off, the spring is going to push the control arm down, but it sits on a pretty good lip here. I was afraid it would explode and hit me in the face, but it's not going to. I actually just let it drop as far as it could, gave it some pry bar until I popped it out of there. It falls on the ground, makes a nice loud ring, but it really doesn't load up, and it's not particularly dangerous for potential energy in that spring. But after you've done that, that's it. It's all apart. And now we'll begin to adjust this a little bit. We got to level this down so that we can set our foot pad on there. We'll figure out how all those parts are going to set up, basically locating off the top. So we'll house the top, we'll put the control arm approximately at a neutral position, and then locate that bottom, confirm it with the other side, doing a couple of reference points checks, and weld that thing in, bolt it up, and we'll be on our way. So we're getting faster at this. It's about 20 minutes to put it all back together, maybe 25, and it was probably 30 coming apart. So not hugely involved once you figure out how to do it. Just big parts, and that's about it.
This was a whole bunch of place and remove and look again and try again, and just kind of getting it as close as I could. Used some old steel off the golf cart that we rebuilt, and was able to cut that to shape and bend it in the vise and make it good enough. Surprisingly, with what felt like crude measurements and a little bit of eyeballing it, they actually friction fit and everything went together pretty tight. The whole pad was welded in place level and based off of the location of the top of the bag.
I think what I'm going to do is later, since I can leave everything put together and in position to support the truck by the frame, and then take the pressure out of the bag, and I can compress the bag by hand and remove it, so then I can add like a shim, which is basically going to be a pipe, I think, up here, so that keeps the center location, and then the pipe will be about that high to where the bag starts, and I think that'll make up the difference and basically put me at the same ride height as I started, but make the bag a couple inches more compressed so that it's got more range both directions.
My original plan was to make something that would mount to the top of the bag and then socket to the inside of the spring perches, and that's why I was building these parts. They worked out perfect, they fit perfect, but then the entire system had to change because I needed to add shims and spacers, so I had to adjust from there. This whole project was a several jack operation and was constantly repositioning and reloading and then disassembling the whole system to try and get everything just right. But once I got the first one done, I kind of got the hang of it, and the rest was more of a process of just building similar parts and going through the same fit process. The most difficult part really was trying to figure out where the medium or the neutral placement of the control arm was going to be once the tires were on and everything was in place. Fortunately, I got pretty good at disassembling and reassembling all the corners, since I did it several times and had done it 4 other times to replace springs before. It was pretty obvious as soon as I got everything installed and inflated that the bags lose power, their ability to continue pushing in an exponential way as they get close to the full expansion range. So you've got to shim these things or space them so that they live more in the middle of the bag height. And once I figured that out, I was able to go back and throw in spacers to the front and the rear. And once that was done, it immediately fixed the problem.
You know, they say even a blind squirrel every once in a while. So I've got the bag compressed. The car is on a jack. This is a 5-inch inside diameter pipe, and turns out it's about perfectly a 5-inch spring perch. No grinding, no creation, no chance that it would ever be this easy, but every once in a while. So I'll just jack the bag into the bottom of it, center it up, weld it to the bag plate, and then it'll just detach from the spring perch, and that'll be that. Nice and easy. So I've got the, it's a 4-inch spacer, 5-inch internal diameter pipe, and it fit perfectly, but I had to weld some garbage on the outside of my socket system here to keep this just located in the center, and everything's just mechanically connected. It'll be under pressure the whole time, and has a considerable range of travel, plus it's trapped from complete extension by the shock, and in the future a strap, so I'm not too worried about it coming apart. Now getting these positioned again to go through this hole, and line up here was a complete pain in the ass. Probably took me 30 minutes, but I finally got one bolt in, and then I wedged the bag itself with a chisel, picked that up a little bit, and then I stuck this buckyball. It's an old, like, I guess it was a kid's magnet toy that they discontinued for safety, but basically a really small ball bearing. These parts are both aluminum, so I was able to wedge this apart, even with this bolt just barely engaged, stick the buckyball in it, which kept them separated enough that I could twist, and it removed the friction here until I got the second bolt lined up, and I just reached in with the screwdriver and knocked it out of there. So that worked a lot better than the first 20 minutes of trying to compress the bag with clamps and do a bunch of stupid crap that didn't work.
Now that it's on the airbags, it's working pretty well. I've carried a couple thousand pounds on the bed and been able to do that without even causing it to start bottoming out. It's got different wheels on it now and tires, which is a whole nother story of warranty with the big 40 tires, and maybe that'll be another video later.
Gauge working, at least for the tank pressure. Gotta do the other ones. I'm gonna have to move the valve block to get the other sensors in, but this is way more helpful than the rest. The rest are just kind of for fun.
The whole thing is run with an Xbox controller. It's wireless, and I've got the code copied and kind of a copy and paste setup to do this all yourself if you wanted to. That'll be a different video, and I'll try and put that all in one place. But the entire thing was pretty cheap. That valve block I found for $47, and it's a complete identical thing to a VU4, which is normally in the $500 range or more than that. The tank uses a couple of pressure sensors. One feeds the computer and one feeds the pressure sensor that is in the cab, but the whole thing works pretty well.
105 psi, so now it'll engage the valves. It's above 90, or maybe it's above 100. I can't remember where I left it in the programming, but now it'll engage. Left rear, up. A little excessive, but it's going to stay here for a while, so in case there's any bleed off, that'll work fine. And right rear will go up a little bit more. It's good for now.
The next video may go into some higher level detail on the whole system, and there'll be another that shows how the controller system and the Xbox setup works. So hit the subscribe and you'll get the notification when that goes up.